Thank you, Zoom. Happy Tuesday. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this conversation that is, I say it's my favorite for about everything. I mean, you've all been around me enough to know, and those of you that are watching and recording, that I have a lot of favorite things. But this idea of getting rooted is so important. And I think we skip over it so often. And yet it is the crux of all of the things that I do, even when I forget that it is. So it's so important. And I am thrilled and excited and grateful that you are giving yourself this opportunity to dig in literally and figuratively to this idea of getting rooted and how it is the foundation for everything that then you want to create. Some of you might have seen this in an email and I've shared this, right? But a few weeks ago, I asked this question: what do people want to learn about? What do you want to dig into? And hands down, it was how to figure out what you want and how to get it. And I love that, right? Because it was such a reminder that we are doers, right? We want to create big things in the world. You want to, if you were with me at some point over the summer, I led a jump into your life challenge, right? You want to take those steps. And yet, over and over and over again in my life, I have been reminded about this fact that until we are rooted, until our foundation, our inner foundation is strong, everything else is a little bit like throwing spaghetti at the wall. It might stick, it might also make a mess, and it eventually falls back down. And it's what's funny is that if I think about flying has been a metaphor that has always been important in my life. And I don't think I put those pieces together until recently. But all of that flying, right? Like you have to start from a grounded place when you're flying. The plane takes off. When I was paragliding, right? You have to be on the mountain. You run off the mountain, but you have to have something underneath your feet to be able to take off, to be able to create those things. And so this is where we begin. But I'll backtrack because I'm actually going to ask you a question and then I'll do a little bit of introduction. Those of you that are here live know me, but if you're watching a recording or don't, who's this chick that wants to talk about this? Why does she know about this? So let me ask you in the chat, I would love for you to share, what does being rooted, grounded, centered, what does that mean to you? Right? What does it mean? Go ahead and add that into the chat, please. And for those of you that don't know, by way of introduction, I was a classroom teacher for 12 years, so I have incredible wait time. Right. If you were being connected to your truest self. Some of my very favorite words. Thank you, Christina. Welcome, welcome. Maria the Gardener. I like that title. It's a perfect title or name for being in a conversation about being rooted. You're fine. You are absolutely fine, Jen. Stop living in anticipation. Yeah. Okay. So this question is, what is being rooted, right? What does that mean to you? What does it sound like? It means that I have a base to start from, and just instead of just flailing and trying different things that don't get you to your goals. Awesome. Okay. Right. So it's important to think about what this means to us, because even that is a starting place. And I have been thinking a lot about this and what does it really mean to be rooted? So we're going to actually play about with this from the perspective of some different things, because I think it's interesting to think about all the different things in life that are rooted or could be rooted, right? But to tell you a little bit about who I am and why this conversation is so important to me. I am somebody that has lived with a lot of energy. I am somebody who's all fire, right? I am a Leo, true and true. And I tend to be moved by big sparks, by this idea, right, of big energy. And over the course of my life, what I've realized is that when I was a classroom teacher, when I was writing, doing some freelance work and blogging for a few years, and in these last 6 years, being a coach for women who come to me in this place of feeling adrift, the thing that I've always done for others is help them find their roots, is help them create a space where they can connect to that truest version of themselves, to clarity, right? My friends used to come to me when I was much younger and they're like, I just need an Elena question. Like, what does that mean? You just ask the right questions, right? But it's that idea of coming back to that inner place. I didn't know the words to it until maybe 6 or 7 years ago, but I've always believed that we had everything we needed and craved within us, or my life has always shown that to me. In my early 20s, when I was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma, and I went through 6 months of chemo, went into remission, but then recurred and needed a bone marrow transplant, my body gave me the cells back that I needed, literally, right? It was an autologous stem cell transplant, meaning the cells came from me. Years later, when I was trying to get pregnant and couldn't, and we had chosen a donor egg, my daughter came from me, right? I've been reminded of this over and over again. And so to me, this sense of being rooted starts from these life experiences and this knowing that sometimes we just have to get out of our own way. That is one of the things that keeps us from not being rooted. We are really good at putting things on our own way, right? Really, I'm Olympic. I'm like Olympic level, right? And I see a few others of you that feel that way too. So I've done this work as part of how I naturally show up in my own life for others, frankly, with my family. We picked a house based on roots, or land for a house based on a tree. So this is a topic that's been always important to me. And my intention for today is that you reconnect to the importance of why getting rooted is the first place to start for just about anything, on a daily basis, on a regular basis, for all the things. And that you leave with at least one nudge, practice to help you either get started or reconnect to getting rooted for yourself. So let's think about, just for a moment, about some things in life that we think of as rooted, right? Trees, plants. If you're rooted as a tree or a plant, it means that you are attached and tethered to the earth, to the ground, and draw up nutrients from the soil to help you grow. Do we agree with that? Okay. If you're a person, we talk about being rooted in community. Yeah. If you are a person rooted in community, you probably feel connected to a group and as if you belong. We've all had those moments where we don't feel like we belong, and we've had those moments where we feel like we belong, right? There's that sense of roots, putting down roots, right? In a place. If you're rooted in a belief, you believe that thing to your very core. Yeah. If you're standing on one leg, right? Being rooted or grounded means that you feel strong and balanced, even if wobbly, but able to maintain that stance. It doesn't mean, right? Like you might still wobble, but you bring yourself back. Sometimes you fall, you come back. And So I offer these just because I think it's helpful to kind of broaden the conversation of all the different ways that we are rooted. Sometimes you hear the words grounded or centered, right? But at the end of the day, being rooted offers you a sense of balance and a place of discernment almost, right? It is a starting point. I actually looked up the definition and I was surprised because it said well-balanced and sensible. And I was like, sensible? I don't know that I necessarily equate being rooted with sensible, but there's that place of, you know what matters and you make sense from there, right? I once had a coaching client who described the impact of the work that we were doing together with me as, she said she felt like a redwood tree, that she could be jostled but unmoved. And I loved that, right? Because it's that idea of you having this inner strength, this inner stability. Another client talked about the journey as if she'd become her own island. And I was like, oh, tell me about the island. I love it when folks make up their own metaphors. And she said, well, my island isn't big. It's about the size of a yoga mat. But around this island, anything can happen. There can be storms, but on my island, I know that I have everything I need. The issue, the challenge, the difficulty for most of us is that while we understand the value perhaps of being rooted in family and community, we forget that rootedness starts on the inside first. And we often attach our roots to others, right? Too often we grow roots that aren't ours to grow. We take on beliefs, ideas, values, ways of being that are passed down to us by families, by communities, by expectations, by shoulds. Anybody ever live in a should? Okay, I'm glad I'm not alone. Thank you for that. So let's redefine what this means to be rooted and explore why it matters. Right? Let me ask before I do that, being rooted in community, yes, right? Sometimes, and so to that point, sometimes, right, we put all of our roots in one place and we let that define us. So let's think about then, if we agree that being rooted creates a strong foundation, that it is a starting point. It is your core. It's also your home, right? Being rooted on the inside first is a practice of belonging. It gives you a place where you know that you can be and operate from and make decisions from and with. It is your truth. It is a kernel. It is a seed. And being rooted creates its own system of nourishment and nurturing. If you think about, so actually, let me show you because I can. So friends, these plants, I don't know how many of these now growing in my house. I should go around and count. But on my desk, I have 3. Nowhere else in my office. They live in other places because of better light. But this, I have, let's say, at least 15 of these plants that all started from one. And I snipped the base and I put them in water to grow new roots. Right? The thing about the water is that the roots grow and they can only grow so big. The plant can only grow so big. The roots are taking up the nourishment from the water, but they need more. right? They need soil. When they have soil, the roots suck up the good stuff that's in the soil, right? Plants, trees, the roots bring the energy up and they allow that thing to grow, to expand. So they create a system of nurturing and nourishment. I would offer you that this is, that's too bad. This is the reason why being rooted is so important, because when we are rooted, we create our own internal system of nourishment and nurturing instead of relying on everybody else. Just yesterday, I was talking to a new Thrive Circler who was talking about how she kind of gets, and a lot of us do, her validation of something being good by the other people she works with, by the people in her family. When you have strong roots, you can move in the direction of creating that validation internally, right? Not only does it offer inner stability, which allows us to then create stability or feel at ease and more peace in our lives, but it has this ripple effect. I'd love to know at this point what questions you have, what thoughts you have about this, what sticks out to you about any of this, or maybe what's hard about that. It all sounds good, Elena, and yet it feels tricky. What thoughts come up for you as you think about this? How do you root in yourself? I love that question. We're going to go there. Thank you for asking. Right? Because yes, how do you do that? Right? And that question is at the root, sorry, I can't help myself, of why it's so hard. Because we are so used to rooting in everybody else and everything else, right? So this is a super important question and is kind of the crux of all the things. And we're not going to fix it for everybody today, but we're going to create a pathway. How's that forward into that exploration? Okay. So, so oftentimes, right, the thing that comes up, one of the things that's coming up, I think that's hard for some people in terms of this rootedness is the people pleasing, right? That we are offered opportunities or things come up, shoulds, expectations, and all the hats we wear, and trying to figure out that place of, is this mine? Is this not? When roots are deep in other places, it's hard to get them out. Oh yes, weeds. All right, friends, I love a good gardening metaphor, by the way. And weeds happen all the time, right? And so how do we keep taking care of those weeds so that they don't get rooted? Aha, yes, so we're gonna get there too. Can one be or become so rooted that you get stuck? Oh, I mean, yes, right? Because if I were to leave this plant here, it will get stuck. It will not continue to grow. At some point, and actually this one is there, I don't know if you can see how many roots are there, this one needs soil to grow, or this is basically how it's going to stay. Right? So absolutely, can one's roots, and have you ever tried to remove an invasive vine that is growing in your yard? That thing has really strong roots, right? And it grows everywhere. So it can be very hard. Weeds can be pests or opportunities. Oh yes, there are some beautiful weeds, right? That are beautiful, that are lovely to look at. So sometimes it's our definition of that. And so just creating space to look at that. Such fabulous thoughts. Thank you all for sharing. All right, and we're going to get back to, I think, most of these. And if I don't, ask the question again at the end. Okay. So last month I was traveling and I was at the spa. Yes, I was. I decided I was going to treat myself. Twice I went to the spa. And at the spa, they start with this little ritual. You choose an intention, and then there was a mantra to read. And the intention that I chose on my second trip to that spa was, I am grounded. And when I read it, the reason that I chose it is because I read the mantra, which said, flying begins on the ground. And I was like, yeah, yes. And it said, the more grounded you are, I put in my word rooted, the more rooted you are, the higher you can fly, right? So this isn't an idea that's rocket science. This is, something that we can all understand. And it makes sense because every jump, every flight, every expansion, every moment of opportunity or growth starts somewhere. And that's what we're going to dig into. So we've already covered this a little bit, but let's just get really explicit, right? What keeps us from being rooted? What do you think? Put in the chat. What keeps you from being rooted? We've talked about this. So some of you have said people pleasing, right? Being stuck, not knowing. So many different things can keep us from being rooted. And I'm going to offer a few of my favorites because there are some. I think there are some regular offenders. Fear of failure. Yeah, expectations of others. All right. Societal, cultural expectations. Absolutely. All right. So, yes to all of those. Also, past and future thinking. Right? And this is rooted in expectations, in fear of failure, in those societal and cultural expectations, right? But when we are stuck thinking about the past or always just thinking about the future, it's hard to put down roots in the present, right? These roots change on a daily basis based on the amount of light that they get, based on if I change the water, right? They are going to grow steadily over time. Those roots aren't thinking about what I'm going to do tomorrow. In fact, roots will grow towards the water, right? So the past and future thinking gets in the way. The what if thinking. Anybody else love me a good what if? Right? What if this? What if that? What if is not rooted? Because it's speculation. Now, I love being creative. I've always had an imagination, right? There's a place for what if. But if you spend your day entirely in what if, the wind is going to take you this way or that. Right? It's why I have wildflowers not in my wildflower garden, because the wind took the seeds and took them somewhere else, which is delightful and unexpected and lovely, right? But if we spend our entire time there, we're not operating from that place of truth for ourselves. Overthinking, very similar to all that what ifs. Catastrophizing, right? This is going to happen. And you all mentioned the people pleasing, 100%, right? That keeps us out of the things that are ours, the shoulds. So, disaster thinking, yes, right? 100%. So let's get into this idea then of how do you get rooted, right? And I'm going to share with you three access points to begin to think about this. This is really the foundation of all of the work that I do with my clients. And so I really want to say to you to remember that all of these things can become practices, explorations. They are not a light switch that you magically turn on and stays in the on position at all times. We get to come back to them. And the exploration in particular about being rooted, for me, I have to intentionally choose to root, to create space to get rooted every single day. When I don't, if I miss a day, okay, not a huge deal. If I miss 2 days, over a period, I've looked at about 2 weeks, right? 10 days, 2 weeks is pretty much I start to feel like something's a little bit off if I am not intentionally tending to my roots in a way that feels mine. Because I've tried getting rooted from what somebody else told me to do. That also doesn't work, because what works for me may or may not work for you, right? So this is all about stepping towards finding your own system. So the first step to getting rooted, honestly, it's going to sound simple and perhaps not very exciting, but I would offer you is super important. It's to create space for your roots. So we can't just automatically put roots down. They have to have space to become roots. And that sounds a little anticlimactic, and yet is so important. So the wildflower garden I mentioned, you can't see, but when I look outside my office right behind our fence, there is a wildflower garden that we created. Those wildflowers I didn't magically just sprinkle some seeds and the wildflowers were there. I would like that to have happened in my non-gardener brain a few years ago. I would have probably tried that. And yet, the reason that those wildflowers are thriving is because we created space. We removed all the invasive vines. And friends, that took a lot of soil, a lot of sweat, a lot of sweat, and time. Because what we did when we first removed all of the invasive things that were growing there, and when I say invasive, for those of you that are thinking, but weeds, right? Virginia is known to a lot of invasive species and vines, and they get really grippy and go everywhere, and then other things can't grow. So not only did we clear the space, but then we had to maintain it being cleared and create a system, a boundary, so that the invasive things couldn't continue to grow, right? So we put cardboard down so that those roots wouldn't get new light. And then we put soil on top of the cardboard. It was like that for 3 or 4 months before then we could add new soil and then add the seeds. We often want to rush and think that our roots should grow like that. But what I would offer you in terms of this idea of creating space for your roots is this question: what do your roots need to grow? What do they need? Right? Clutter, physical clutter, takes up space and it distracts us from what's important. Emotional, mental clutter. So if you've been following along with this masterclass series or watching some of the replays or not, there is a brain dump from Sunday. A brain dump is one of my very favorite practices. And on the one hand, maybe it helps you get rooted on what's important, but I would offer that actually what it does is it's a precursor to getting rooted. It creates space because it takes whatever's in your brain and puts it on paper, right? So that is a creating space practice because roots require space to belong and they require space to then grow. They invite us to tend to them. And they ask for ongoing nurturing, right? So if you think about a tree, plants, whatever it is, the first step to planting a tree is to dig a hole. The second step is all about tending. You want to know what's in that soil, right? It should be nutrient-rich soil rather than clay and rocks. And so there's tending to that space that happens before you even plant anything. And so before you can put down your own roots and rely on them to be strong, I would offer you that you have to tend and nurture your inner resources first. Right? So this first step of getting rooted is creating space, but not just any space, a space of belonging within yourself. And I can already see some of the faces. Even for those of you that aren't here live but are watching this later, I'm like, yeah, that sounds like a tall order when I'm perhaps not always very kind to myself, right? But it begins by noticing and observing, by looking at where you are, by noticing and observing the words and the actions you use towards or against yourself. Right? So if you consider this soil tending metaphor that I've opened up for us, we want to plant seeds in soil that's fertile, loose, and that has a good level of moisture. The same holds true with your inner garden. Because we all have an inner garden. It's that inner system. We want to create our roots in an inner garden that is compassionate, that is allowing and accepting, and that is loving. And that is not always our starting point for a lot of us. So it begins by starting to just notice and maybe catch yourself, to notice the words you're using towards yourself. Now, maybe you are a rock star and have been filling up on only empowering language and thoughts. That could very well be, right? Or perhaps, if you're human, like most of us, the chorus sounds more like dismissiveness, or maybe self-deprecating banter, right? Maybe you notice that you use the words just to describe your actions in a way that diminishes how you've shown up or your value. Or maybe, this was mine, you tell yourself that something isn't that important, right? Which I'd invite you to consider is actually code for I'm not important. Now, not everything needs to be made into all the things. And yet, when we spend most of our day thinking, oh, it's not that important. Oh, that's not that important. Probably actually is, right? The roots sometimes need to be crowded. Yes. Oh, Emily, so true, right? Some really need other things around them for support, and some need more space. Absolutely. And so it's knowing what is true for you. Tall poppy syndrome. Yeah. Right. And so this idea of beginning to create space by getting to know, right, what's that banter sound like in your head, is a way to start tending to the soil that then you're going to get rooted in. And it moves you in the direction of then creating boundaries. And we often think about boundaries as, in fact, I even just described it, right, with the invasive vines, about keeping out what we don't want to grow. But the important thing about boundaries is that we can create them for what you want to keep in, for what you're creating space for, to create structure for that, right? Any questions about this idea of getting rooted by creating space? Questions or thoughts or takeaways? And this is to that question of how do you root in yourself? This is the first step, to notice what's in my garden, right? Boundaries are so difficult. You are not alone, right? And so we start, and we're going to get to this I think, as we continue, because this is the piece of, it's hard to even know what you're creating boundaries around and for until you know what matters to you, right? And if all we're doing is throwing that spaghetti at the wall and we're not rooted, we might be creating boundaries that really aren't important for us. I would offer, for everybody that thinks they're not good at boundaries, there is probably something that you have a boundary around because it's super important to you. And it may be so ingrained in you that you don't even realize it, right? I was in a service last night for somebody from our synagogue lost, her father passed away. And so they were, they had a minyan, a shiva, which is typical in the Jewish tradition to honor that life. And people were telling stories. And this woman was telling stories about how, you know, Friday night dinners, Sunday night dinners were something that they did every week in their house growing up. That kind of becomes a boundary. It's a boundary, right? It's those things that are so important to us, right? So boundaries can look like a lot of different things, is what I would offer. We're going to get more into more boundaries even more in the coming weeks. Note to self. So number 2, right? So we've got creating space. The second is to get rooted in your body instead of your mind. Your brain is a very, very powerful tool. I'm not here to tell you anything different. And yet, I think we spend too much time there. And what I know is that your body is actually much smarter than your brain. Your body knows things. It's like the ultimate compass, the ultimate lie detector test. So let me share just a quick story with you. Back in 2000, I ran my first marathon. And that's important because I ran that marathon, those 26.2 miles, really because a doctor once told me that I couldn't. He described, my oncologist, that, for instance, the lung damage that I had because of the chemotherapy that we had chosen intentionally so that maybe I wouldn't have a fertility impact might give me lung damage. And it did. And he said, you know, it's not going to impact you that much. You'll just never run a marathon. And I was like, no problem, not a runner. Years later, somebody floated this idea of running a marathon. And because I do these things, I was like, that sounds like a fabulous idea. Why? I don't know. But because the doctor once told me I couldn't. So totally in my brain, right? Nothing in my body wanted me to do that. It was my brain saying, you've got something to prove. Now, marathon 2 was to prove that the first wasn't a fluke. Also all about my brain, right? Marathon 3, 10 years later, give or take, and I was feeling strong. My body felt strong. I was thinner. Guess who decided to run another marathon? But here's what happened. I had a great training season. I had a horrible. I didn't have the run I wanted to have because of an expectation that because I was thinner, I should be able to run faster and beat the 5-hour mark, which is somebody else's definition of success, right? So I didn't get that. And so I ran another one 6 weeks later. And that 4th marathon taught me something, because in that 4th marathon, I listened to my body, not my brain, as I ran. Because at the give or take mile 20 mark, don't hold me to that, I don't remember exactly, my knee started bothering me. And my knee had never, in the course of all of my running, shocking, I know, my knee had never bothered me. Now I'm a slow runner, but I still really wanted to break that 5 hours. And I was absolutely on target to do that. And then my body started saying, knock, knock, pay attention. And I remember making the choice. This was in San Antonio, and we were out on the river, and you're kind of coming back towards the city. So there aren't a ton of people around, especially when you're towards the back of the marathon pack. And I remember thinking, okay, well, I could push really hard, but then I have no idea if I'm going to be able to finish or how. Or I could listen, and maybe I just need to walk, run. It was the first time, friends, in my entire running journey that I used my body as a guide. I finished the marathon. I didn't break 5 hours. But when I crossed that line, I had been kind to my body. I had listened to it. So then, yes, I ran a 5th. The following year, actually 2 years, yes, the following year. And that race was dedicated to listening to my body in the training and on that day. And I share this with you because this is a thing that is foreign to us, for most of us. We're really good at judging our body, right? The back pain, the shoulder pain, the hip pain. And yet our body always has messages for us. When I lead a yin yoga session, I talk about the sensations in your body as benevolent messengers. They're there for us to notice. And so one of the ways to get rooted in you is to start getting rooted in your body, to start paying attention to it, to not be in such a rush to move from one thing to a next, to notice. So I have the great honor of getting to go to a magical place. A few of you that are on this call at the moment have been there, Rancho La Puerta. It's a destination spa in Tecate, Mexico. And it was co-founded by this incredible woman who is 99 now, right? And I asked her, she still, when she's able, goes to the ranch once a week for like a Q&A night. She's amazing. And is just, her brain is magnificent. She's magnificent in all the levels. And you get to ask questions. And so a few years ago, I asked the question, do you have a daily practice that you start with? She does. Before she gets out of bed in the morning, and she still does this. She pauses, like she wakes up, she takes a few breaths, and she kind of scans through her body and gets to know what it's saying to her on that particular morning. Right? You don't have to do anything fancy, but it's even just beginning to notice, right? Instead of judging. So rather than labeling a sensation as good or bad, noticing, oh, I feel warmth in my stomach. I feel this, I feel compression, right? Even changing the words we're using, but slowing down enough to allow your body to have sensations. I often will run people through different guided visualizations, and we start with a body scan, right? Look for the sensations, notice the things that your body is saying. And people will say, I don't feel anything. I feel numb, is what they'll say. I would offer that getting to know and being in your body is like learning a foreign language. We have to allow there to be sensations. And oftentimes that takes slowing down and giving it permission to speak to you. So practice number 2 is to get rooted in your body by developing a connection with it. Your body is a magical system of information, right? It alerts you to your intuition. It alerts you to things that are scary, right? The whole fight, flight, or freeze. But if we're constantly in this armor and moving so fast, we never allow ourselves to process and be with that information. And this is something that I love to work on with people because it's like opening up. Right? And yes, you can access it through your breath. You could, frankly, you don't even have to be in a yoga shape, friends. You could stand or sit and just notice. Feel your heartbeat. Right? All right, number 3. This is the big one. And that's why it's number 3. I mean, and right, and this is layered with so many things, and yet is so important. Get rooted in your truth. Your truth, not somebody else's truth. And that's why I say this is the big one, because this is the one where we have to peel all the onion layers back from, right? Or I read recently somewhere that it's not so much onion layers, but it's like a clove of garlic, right? That there are the different parts, that each clove is a part, and that we're made of parts, which I kind of love the idea of. So this is rooted, all the words, on this question of who are you? What makes you you? What matters? What doesn't? Right? And that all sounds good. And you're probably like, well, yeah. My very favorite way to get to these truths of who I am, and this is really the foundation of the Thrive Circle, which is the 10-week exploration that I do, the Thrive Unleashed, which is all of the work that I do, group or one-on-one, always explores core values. Because your core values are the 3 to 5 things that make you you. They are the tendencies, the traits. I have a colleague, a friend who's an educational neuroscientist. She talks about these as your filters, your brain filters, because your reticular activating system actually is made to notice these things, and the other stuff, it becomes clutter. So it takes in information through these things that are your values. And if you've never done values work, it can be a layered exploration. You can Google how to find your core values. You can ask me and I will send you a resource, and there's a podcast episode. What I want you to know about this is, yes, it's important to explore them and to get them, and it can be helpful to have a guide to do that. And before that, the question of who am I is a really fabulous place to start. If you ask yourself, who am I, on a daily basis for 2 weeks, you're going to get a different answer on a lot of those days. And that is all important information, because you are not just one thing. And this is the thing, I think, in terms of the getting stuck and the weeds and all of these things, right? We tend to take on roles that other people give us. We take on, it's like going to a hat store. Ooh, I'll try on this one, right? And sometimes we think we should. You're so welcome. Thank you for being here. And so it's this opportunity to start saying, okay, yeah, maybe this was a truth that was mine at some point, but no longer serves me, or that I subscribed to, but don't want to subscribe. I want to unsubscribe, right? We unsubscribe from emails all the time. We get to unsubscribe from truths that aren't ours. And the more that we do that, we start to get clarity on what are your truths. How? Good question, right? How do you unsubscribe? Is that the question? Okay. So the how of the unsubscribing is being rooted in what does make you you first. Because when you are rooted in what makes you you, it then becomes easier to say, yep, that's not important. That's not going to move me in the direction of what I want to grow. Again, practices over time, right? But I will share with you. So one of the things that I explore, and this is, you all know me, that I love to teach and do these things, right? And so it's really hard for me to say, you can do all of this on your own. It's done better and more efficiently with a coach. It's true. And yet, but I'm going to show you, right? So I have this tool, I call it the stick figure. This is a picture of your truest self. So this is mine, and I don't know if you can see it, right? But it really is a stick figure, and it's rooted in my core values, which for me are curiosity, commitment, belonging, delight, and freedom. So I use these as filters for decision making, right? Does something fit this? Is it fed by, or does it nurture one of these core values? Now, sometimes something doesn't, but over time, I start to notice that those things that don't, they're making me spend energy and effort on things that I don't want to do, right? So it becomes aligning to these roots, to letting these become stronger, right? And that's the practice over time. But this all starts with, who am I? What matters to me? What doesn't? Okay. And so the more you ask yourself that question and play with just receiving the answers, that's where then we can create those roots and allow the roots that are important to grow. So one of my former Thrive circlers, who admittedly says she doesn't love turbulence in life. She doesn't like feeling unsettled. And we talked about, well, okay, so what do you want to feel, right? And she wants to feel steady and connected and rooted. But then as we were playing with it, I said, well, all right, so what's something that would feel that way? She's like, well, a plane. A plane is steady. But then I could see her whole face change. And she was like, except for when it goes through turbulence. And I said, say more. She said, well, here's the thing about a plane. A plane is made to withstand turbulence, right? It is built to be able to move through these things. Now, I'm watching the show Manifest. I don't know if that plane is made to withstand turbulence. I'll tell you when I'm done with this show. But right, it's that idea. It gets you from point A to point B, and it's made to withstand all the elements. Bend without breaking. Yeah. Right? Another client once described this work, and this was somebody who really was rooted in external validation, and based the definition of her success and her thriving on others. And what she got to was, she said, do you remember like the seesaws at the playground? I'm not even sure if they still have seesaws anymore, but I said, yeah. She said, well, I want the seesaw to be even. And we paused, and I said, tell me about why you want the seesaw to be even. Well, a seesaw even means that everything is right. That's equilibrium. That's balance. And so I pushed her gently-ish in an Elena way on that. And I said, so how often does that happen? That a seesaw is perfectly balanced? And we thought about it, right? It would take two people of the exact same size, of the exact same length of their legs, to be still at the exact same moment for that to be still for any longer period of time, right? What's important about that seesaw is the fulcrum. And what she got to was she could be her own fulcrum, right? Rather than relying and basing her thriving on what was happening on this side or this side, maybe what she could focus on was being her own fulcrum. So how do you do that, right? How do you be your own fulcrum instead of being swayed by others? It's making these practices around getting rooted regular. Committing to showing up for yourself, to develop your roots. And I'm going to give you a bonus practice because I kind of love this, and this will be life-changing. In short order, you can use this today. Add the words "in this moment" to just about anything. Meaning, I love the question, what do I know for sure? That's a really great question to, play with me. What are you rooted in? What matters? What doesn't? If you add in this moment, it brings you back into the present. What do I know for sure in this moment? What matters most in this moment? How does my body feel in this moment? Right? So in this moment is a beautiful and powerful phrase to help you create space and to get closer to the truths that matter. Right? Because we spend so much time in the past, the future, the what ifs, all of those, in all the planning. Roots are not born in the planning stage. Roots happen when we create space for ourselves to belong, where we give ourselves a starting point that is connected and truthful. Yeah. So I would love to know what questions, what thoughts you have. We're about to hit the 1:30 mark. So if you have to pop off, please feel free. We're going to go just a few minutes longer. But I would love to know, what's a takeaway? What's a question? What is a thought that you have about this entire idea or these 3 practices that move you to get rooted? Learning what your core values are. Yeah. So I can definitely send you resources. And we'll also just in a moment talk about another way to access that. But it's really powerful. And really what I want to offer is this starting point of beginning to notice this question of who am I, right? Or the things that matter, the things that don't, and just beginning to catalog those. Yeah, thank you. Other thoughts or questions or takeaways? Okay. So this work, right, is really, really powerful. And you can take anything that we talked about today and start to play with it. And what I love about this is information, and none of this is, you've probably heard things like this before in some way, shape, or form. The thing about roots is that they, right, as I mentioned, they require consistent and intentional nurturing and nourishment. And this is where sometimes the weeds come up, and we don't tend to them for a while, and suddenly it's overgrown by weeds, right? Or if you're with me, like me, and you have roses out front, and you spend any time deadheading them, and you think you've gotten all of the dead heads, and then you go back out the next day, and there are more. Yes, there are always going to be more. And so it's the commitment to continuing to show up for yourself. So I see being rooted can allow space to change routines and daily questions to reroot. Yeah. Making time for yourself is the hard thing. Too busy caring for others, right? So if the idea of having someone and a system and a group feels delicious, to help you structure that ongoing commitment to that, this is where something like the Thrive Circle comes in. The Thrive Circle was built with this in mind. The Thrive Circle was born out of my response to the pandemic, because I felt like we need something. And community, to me, coming together, it's my very favorite thing. And so this is a 10-week exploration. You get the Thrive Journal, you dive into your core values, you think about what it is, what are the practices that are going to help you tend to those. So this is structured, and it keeps you integrating and developing your own roots that are personal and supportive of you in a way that is meaningful and powerful and full of belonging, right? So if this sounds delicious, I'll put the link in the chat. The link is in all the other places. You can find it, ask questions. We start October 5th, but we have a Kickstart session next Tuesday for early birds, and it is my delight and honor to get to invite you to that if you have signed on by then. So just know, if that is interesting to you, I would be happy to have a conversation. Payment plans available, all the things. You can read all about it, but talk to me about it. And the best thing is, being curious, friends, you have everything to gain and nothing to lose. And if you're thinking, I don't need that, but these practices sound interesting and I'm going to keep playing with them, you also know that we have 3 more weeks of exploration. 3 more weeks? I think 3 more weeks. We have several more weeks of explorations of this masterclass series. The next session is a full moon yin yoga and meditation. You're so welcome. Thank you. On Monday. And then next week, we have finally the one that you all wanted. How do I figure what I want and how to get there? You're so welcome. But just know that those are coming. And then we end with prioritize this, not that. So these are all meant to support you exactly where you are. So reach out, ask the questions in whatever way I can support you. I would be honored and delighted. So thank you all for being here. I'm going to stop the recording, and then if anybody wants to ask questions, please feel free to hit the button to stop the recording. Thank you again, everyone, for being here.